Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining everyone today on this snowy afternoon here in Fort Collins. We are kicking off our Research Thrust C series, which explores how cities can intentionally foster the widespread adoption of infrastructure, development patterns, consumer behaviors, and management practices that advance sustainable water management. I sure hope to see you back here next week for a presentation from PhD candidate Timothy Kirby at Florida International University, investigating homeowner adoption of new technologies. As you know, we are recording these webinars and I will be posting them to our website and YouTube channel. Feel free to enter any questions into the chat queue, or we'd love to see your beautiful face. So turn on your webcam and your mic, and you can engage with Dr. Henry at the end of his presentation. So with that, I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Adam Douglas Henry, professor in the School of Government and Public Policy, who's an affiliated member of the University of Arizona's Institute for the Environment. Dr. Henry's research focuses on questions of policy learning and sustainable development, particularly how networked groups of actors in the policy process collaborate to manage complex and divisive issues of environmental policy and sustainability. Dr. Henry's recent research has focused on the integration of science and policy in issues of environmental risk and development of computational models of social influence and the adoption of residential solar energy. Adam uses a variety of approaches to study questions of policy learning and sustainability, including agent-based modeling, statistical models of network structure, and mathematical models of self-organizing networks. So with that, I know we can see you and hear you, and I will let you take it away.
Great. Okay. So thanks, Sarah, for that very kind introduction. That's wonderful. It's good to see you all again, at least a nice subset of our UWIN community, and I appreciate your taking some time to hear about our project C11, understanding the adoption of sustainable water solutions. So I am speaking on behalf of our team, our group. So this is in collaboration with Gary Paivo. He and myself are the PIs on this particular project. And we also have a larger research team, of course, as is true for most of all of these projects within UWIN. And as I go along, I will be reviewing work that's done, by myself, but also by others. And so my apologies if I maybe don't represent something quite as well as the original author of a particular paragraph or so would present it, but there it is. So what I have prepared for today is roughly, I'm estimating a little more than 30 minutes worth of material. So hopefully that fits okay within your time frame for this webinar. I'm taking the liberty to expand a bit on some of the scientific findings and the theoretical foundations that I, in previous UWIN presentations, have gone through rather quickly, because I think that this is a nice opportunity to dig a little bit deeper in some of these important underlying questions and research findings. But of course, the focus will be on the very last part that I have here, which is applications to sustainability praxis. So I plan to progress through 4 major topics. So we'll start with theoretical foundations, move to some words about our data sets that we gathered and our empirical strategy for studying our theoretical questions, some major findings, which overlaps with applications to practice, but the major findings is more like a summary of the basic science results and where we've published those results. And as I go along, I'm absolutely fine if folks want to interject. We're quite accustomed to doing this on Zoom, so you can raise a hand, you can send a chat or so, or if you want to just talk at the very end, that's also completely fine. So I want to start with some critical theoretical foundations. And talk specifically about the importance of sustainability innovations and understanding the factors that lead to the adoption or not of sustainability innovations. As a scholar of public policy, I am often exposed to this idea that is expressed in the literature and in circles of practice, that what is technically possible to advance sustainability outpaces by far what we do as a society. So our capacity to achieve sustainable systems, whether this is in energy systems or food systems, water systems, whatever, is much higher than our seeming ability to actually translate knowledge into practice. So policy learning and governance innovations that result from learning are a critical pathway to sustainability. A very important question that we face is how do we or should we structure processes, use other types of strategies in order to promote learning and innovations in order to better translate our knowledge into sustainability actions. So when I use this term innovation, sustainability innovations and governance innovations, it refers to a pretty broad scope of activities, which include as a standard variable in the policy sciences, this variable known as policy change. So policy change is when the actions of governments shift from one strategy to another, from paying attention to one problem versus another, but it also includes other things like norms and institutional rules and practices of organizations, not just governments, and technologies to support sustainability. So the core research question that we deal with in this project, which is an important research question within sustainability science in general, is what factors determine the adoption of sustainability innovations within governance systems and by governance systems. So urban water sustainability innovations take on many forms, and sustainability innovations, particularly by urban systems, local governments often, are an explanation for the observed gaps that we see in sustainability outcomes. And just to take one for instance, you have a graphic of over time an estimation of residential water use in the United States, the top blue line. In Arizona, Arizona, the top blue line, the United States nationally, the bottom green line, and then Tucson, a city within Arizona, the orange line, which lives between the national and the state. So what we see here is that Tucson appears to perform quite, a bit worse than the national average, but quite a lot better than the average for the state. And this gap in achievement between Arizona and the US, between the state of Arizona and Tucson, is explained, probably mostly explained, by governance innovations that are occurring at the local level. Sustainability innovations occur in multiple modalities and at multiple scales of governance. By scale of governance, I mean it could occur at the level of an organization, it could occur at the level of a city, at a regional government, a state government, so on. What do I mean by modalities? I mean, we have many different instruments at our disposal to enhance urban water sustainability, ranging from technology and infrastructure, to regulation, which we sort of classically think of as public policy, but it also includes things that aren't commonly thought of as public policy, like education programs or behavioral solutions, market pricing solutions, and so on. So we have a guiding framework to inform our approach to this question. And this is situated within a broader framework that we had proposed and applied to all of the projects occurring within UN across the different thrusts, where we conceptualize projects as focusing on variables that exist within one or more categories of variables, including outcomes, the actual metrics that we use for sustainability, actions, those things that we do to hopefully enhance those sustainability metrics, as well as contextual factors, which include many things, environmental factors, socioeconomic factors that we don't necessarily control, that are somehow exogenous to our behaviors. So how we situate our work within this broader framework is with 4 critical concepts. So we're interested in sustainability outcomes resulting from innovations and how the sustainability innovations promote those outcomes. We don't study so much the relationship between the innovations and the outcomes. We're mostly interested in the adoption of these sustainability innovations, which is influenced by factors that we can control, as well as factors that we can't control. So what are some examples of factors that we can't control? So this would be like environmental shocks, droughts, or major shifts in policy, or ruling dominant coalitions are things that we can't necessarily control. Things that we can control are phenomenon like science policy processes, these institutions that we set up in order to use science more effectively in the policy process, collaborative governance processes, are strategies that we can use to promote the adoption of sustainability innovations. So really what we work on at a theoretical level in this project is the interface, this arrow, from factors that we can control to the adoption of innovations. And what's going on within this arrow is a phenomenon that we call in the social sciences learning, policy learning and social learning. It goes by many terms, but the theoretical mechanism is that we're studying here primarily is the role of networks. So how we interact with other organizations, with other people, and how these interactions expose us to information or other types of social phenomenon that enable us to innovate, that prompt us to make different choices about which innovations we want to adopt, try out, given the problems that we face in our organization or our government, and so on. So networks are a key part of social and policy learning, a key part. And this is something that I've written about and theorized about for many years. So going back before UN, and within UN, we're really deploying much of that theoretical work and studying it in an empirical space. So networks influence learning in many different ways, okay? And these varied ways include, for instance, the collaborations that we have, the exposure we have to other social agents are going to constrain and enable our exposure to information. So if we have networks, we're going to know, in theory, what other people know. We're going to have some access to their resources. We're going to have some access to their experience about what works and what doesn't work. Structures are widely believed, so whether you have a dense structure, sparse structure, centralized, decentralized structure, is widely believed to influence problem-solving ability of actors, so our capacity to solve a complex problem. Beliefs and practices diffuse within networks, so if 2 cities have a tie with one another, they might be more likely to adopt the practices of each other. And then network evolution is going to further shape exposure. So if networks tend to fragment or segregate or silo, to where individuals who have shared information tend to talk and collaborate with one another, then it can create these so-called echo chambers where we don't get exposure to a wide diversity of information and experience. And this can be bad for learning. So that's why I say that networks can both promote learning, but also inhibit learning. So our empirical strategy in this project C11 has been to study the behaviors of urban water professionals and organizations engaged in urban water management, behaviors in terms of the networks that they create and maintain with other organizations, as well as the practices that these organizations take on to deal with their varied challenges of urban water sustainability. So this data set resulted in what we refer to as the UWP data set, Urban Water Professionals data set, and it's based upon surveys that we conducted in 5 UWIN regions. And the stakeholders to urban water governance, the identification of the full set of stakeholders to urban water governance was itself, quite a methodological challenge of this project, because it's one thing to come into a region and say, okay, well, what are the municipalities that are in this region? That's quite clear. What are the different local government systems? What are the different public agencies is a little harder to detect. But then if you're including non-governmental organizations, as well as even potentially private sector organizations as stakeholders in the urban water governance system, which they are, it's a much more difficult task to identify all of them. So what we had done was created protocols to identify a core set of organizations involved in the urban water governance system, and then use respondent-driven sampling, or also known as snowball sampling, to expand this original set to create a very inclusive list of all of those different organizations that are involved. So the survey was filled out by people, but people representing their organizations, and the measurement that we conducted on the survey included measurement of these organizational networks that you see a graphic for right here, as well as the practices and innovation of the organization being studied, as well as a variety of control factors and contextual factors. So network measurement. So I'm just going to just very briefly talk about how we measured the networks and how we measured the practices, both of which represented some pretty neat and fun innovations in how we study these things in the field. So network measurement is a difficult task. It's a challenging task, because you imagine you have 100 organizations in a system, and it's one thing to distribute 100 surveys, but then each of these 100 organizations carry on collaborations with potentially 99 other organizations, and so you have this multiplicative problem where there's really quite an enormous amount of data to be gathered, because we're studying both the properties of the individual units as well as the relationships between them. So so network measurement is a very difficult challenge that folks in the social sciences have been studying for a long time. We used a cascading hybrid roster instrument, which was kind of a cool innovation, where we ask organizational representatives about a broad set of interactions that they conduct with other organizations in the system, and then we cascade that into a more specific set of types of collaboration, subtypes of collaboration that they carry on with those individuals that they nominated, those organizations that they nominated. And so we're able to measure this broad network, this collaboration network that you see in the center of the slide, as well as subtypes of collaboration, such as sharing of information, joint implementation of programs, joint seeking of funding, as well as shared infrastructure projects. So these are just a subset of the different types of collaboration that we've studied. And the graphics that you see are just in one of the UN regions, in the Arizona region. So moving on to praxis measurement, this is another methodological innovation of this particular project, where we had, through a process of interacting with urban water professionals, developed a roster of practices that organizations and local governments are using in order to pursue water sustainability. And the development of this roster was itself a kind of sub-project, and we had implemented it in the survey itself, where we can now attach these practices to all of the organizations that we identified in the network. And we also use some other methods to identify innovations that organizations and local governments are using through open-ended responses, where they're able to tell us about the innovations that their organization is using. So Alan is asking how long it takes for a respondent to complete the survey, and whether there was compensation or other kind of incentive. So we love our respondents because they took a very long time to complete the survey, between 30 and 60 minutes. And there was no compensation other than the ability to inform this research. So within policy research on policy elites, it is difficult, okay, to gain access to these individuals. But one of the nice things that tends to enhance their participation in research studies like this is that we're doing work where they really want their voice to be heard. So that is somehow a professional incentive that they have to participate in this research study, because what they don't want is they don't want us to come along and publish findings that excludes the input of their organization. So that does help to enhance response rate. We also did use some tricks in the design of the survey to offer a truncated version of the survey to individuals who just weren't willing to participate at the level of 30 minutes or so. So this truncated version would take 5 minutes to complete, and we would get a subset of data, which we would later collate into the larger data set. So there's also a question about what are some recommendations for networks for them to enable rather than constrain learning. So I'm going to come to this at the end. I hate to set it up like a murder mystery, but there are some concrete observations that we have from these data, which involve, for instance, the creation of local level networks among organizations of diverse types. So particularly between governmental and non-governmental organizations tends to be in our empirical analysis a very important precondition for innovation to occur. So this is also consistent with theory that really emphasizes the importance of diversity in networks. So you want to create processes that enable organizations from very different sectors of water management, domains of water management to share information, their experiences, and this helps to enhance learning. But I'm going to come to this a little bit later. But thanks for the question. So let me just review a few major findings, and I'm going to go quite quickly through this. You know, each of these bullet points is itself kind of a complex study within a study. I'm just going to say a few words about each of them, and these major findings are somehow distinct from the recommendations for practice because these tend to be more findings from an academic basic science perspective. So one of the very first things that we were interested in was to synthesize theory about policy change in the context of urban water. So independently of the empirics, there's all sorts of theories that exist out there, particularly in the policy process literature, that hypothesize different drivers for cities to adopt or not urban water sustainability solutions. And then we have empirically observed drivers of change. So maybe more the atheoretical literature identifies, a number of factors that are important. And understanding these factors that are important is very important for our research, because we want to measure these factors so that we can understand the relative contribution of networks versus political context versus environmental factors versus other things that drive change. And so some of our earlier work was based on systematic literature reviews, where we identified factors that were theoretically prevalent and ubiquitous to explain change, which includes prominent political science variables like power, public management variables like organizational capacity, and the concept of networks and collaborative processes, which are parts of governance, played in very significantly as well. So explaining implementation as a function of networks. So this is more from a series of analyses that we had done, and we have one paper that recently appeared in Water Policy, which is kind of our best cut at so far at an analysis of the UWP data set to inform the extent to which networks drive innovation. So we used regression models to model as a dependent variable things like perceptions that a place is innovative, diversity of the types of innovations that are adopted by local government, or total numbers of practices, the total quantity of practices adopted as measured on our survey, as a function of network factors. These network factors might be the number of organizations that an organization collaborates with, the diversity of organizations that an organization collaborates with, and the key story to be told here is that networks matter. And networks matter in two ways. Number one, organizations that tend to have more intense levels of collaboration with other organizations in the system tend to adopt more practices. Number two, organizations that have a more diverse set of collaborators, particularly drawn from the governmental and the non-governmental sectors, tend to have greater levels of innovation as measured by the number of practices implemented than organizations that have a more homogeneous set of collaborators, which is very consistent with theory in the social sciences that if you want to learn, you have to have networks that are diverse, that enhance diversity. Okay, network self-organization. What is network self-organization? Network self-organization is the processes by which participants of a network decide to form some ties, don't form others, cut certain ties, maybe rewire them. So this is more of a series of studies that will treat the network structure as a dependent variable. What explains network structure? But it's important to learning and innovation because the network influences innovation. So if we understand the factors that network participants use to position themselves strategically within networks, then we can understand how that will further down the road influence their ability to learn and innovate. So this research, we have a couple of different research studies that looked at this, but one set of results in one of the UWIN regions looked at different subtypes of collaboration. So different network types like information sharing and resource sharing and so on, and found that these subtypes of networks tend to be structured by a process known as homophily, where organizations tend to collaborate with others that share their same problems, that share their same sector of government. There's some power seeking, there's some organizational resource seeking going on within these networks as well, where organizations will want to collaborate with others that have many financial resources and and other phenomenon like this. So yet another research study that went on within this project was to better understand what are the fundamental factors that underlie the practices that are adopted by local governments. And local governments, if we just let survey respondents tell us in an open-ended way, we pursued these types of innovations, we can subject the corpus of all of these measured innovations to some dimension reduction analysis. We identify some key common factors that define different types of action or strategies that places take to pursue urban water sustainability. So the dark cells here indicate high correlations between individual types of practices. So we see some clustering in dimensions such as emphasis on infrastructure technology, centralized versus decentralized water systems, emphasis on using policy instruments, stakeholder involvement and collaboration, and so on. So this research thread of really trying to reduce the complexity of the many different ways in which local governments take on urban water sustainability was was a big part of our work. And finally, I'm just going to say a few words about how networks are structured around the actual practices. So I mentioned this concept of homophily, where organizations might tend to create collaborations with other organizations on the basis of shared traits. Another basis of the formation of ties is having shared types of practices. So we have observed in the data using exponential random graph models, which is a type of statistical model that one uses to model networks, that organizations that tend to be more innovative tend to collaborate with one another. So this might create a phenomenon that we call segregation, where more innovative places tend to collaborate and less innovative places tend to not have access to the information that's generated within those clusters of innovative places, which can further inhibit learning and innovation. Okay, so I'm going to conclude with some reflections, and there's some overlap here with the major scientific findings, reflections on sustainability praxis. So what are recommendations on the practice of urban water sustainability that derives from our research? Well, I'd like to highlight four. This isn't perhaps a complete list. On reflection, maybe we have more, but there's four big ones that I'd like to look at. And the first is to embrace a diverse portfolio of solutions. There does not appear to be any panacea response, best response to the challenge of urban water sustainability. What we have seen looking in the data in many different ways is that there's huge variation in how local governments and organizations pursue urban water sustainability. And there's no single common set of practices that characterize the most innovative place or the most successful place. This is a consistent result over many different analyses from different variations of the data. So the best metric of innovation that we have come to in this research is just simply the use of more practices or the use of more diverse practices. So more practices just meaning that we as an organization or local government are just doing more, trying more different things in order to enhance urban water sustainability. And diverse practices refers to doing things in different domains. So we do, we have some practices in the domain of education, in the domain of governance, in the domain of technology, and that diversity is a good metric of innovation. So one of the implications, the practical lessons learned from this is that we need to embrace context-sensitive design and a diverse portfolio of approaches to One Water sustainability innovations. Second, we need to embrace gradual change. This is particularly an important insight for the policy scholars out there who focus on, oftentimes in scholarly circles, on major policy change rather than incremental policy change. So policy theory typically focuses on the importance of major policy change to signify fundamental shifts in what we value as a society, in our valuation, for example, of sustainability outcomes, and from the perspective of policy scholars, incremental change usually represents just old ways of doing things, not that radical rethinking of our priorities that's broadly thought to be needed for sustainability transition. But what we've observed is, insofar as we've been able to look over time at the evolution of some of these sustainability innovations, is that most change in water management occurs incrementally. It doesn't occur in these sharp shifts. And so the implication of this would be to focus on pathways of change that build incrementally versus challenging core belief systems that drive advocacy coalitions and the structure of the policy process. And we really want to focus here on co-benefits and experimentation. So if there's conflict between organizations, we best resolve this conflict not by shifting power to those organizations that want to pursue the innovation, but rather work out solutions where we can create better collaborations across the urban water governance system, and multiple organizations can all win and discover co-benefits in pursuing sustainability. Third, and this is quite key, to enhance local communication networks. So networks matter is one of the fundamental insights of this work. And lack of coordination between organizations is seen as a major barrier to innovation. This is something that we hear a lot and that we've observed. So places that tend to be less innovative, have less adoption of sustainability innovations tend to be more sparsely connected. So one of these key insights is just focus on building local level networks. They need to facilitate inclusive communication channels, particularly between organizations in the public and non-governmental spheres, probably also including the private sector as well, and also between non-governmental organizations and local leaders. So between the political sphere and public management sphere. So one of the implications of this for practice is that we can use network thinking, network data, to diagnose the quality of networks in a local region, a city or a region, and identify the extent to which they're inclusive, integrated, or exclusive, more segregated. And these data can be used to identify critical connections. What are those organizations that need to collaborate in order to create a more integrated system? We can identify those critical links from these data. Fourth, and finally, leverage networks that link governmental and non-governmental actors. So the third point, it has more to do with the importance of networks in terms of their quantity. So we need to enhance connectivity, the number of connections in a network or the density of that network. But this fourth point really underscores the importance of diversity or the quality of those relationships in terms of how do we distribute our network budget, if you will, among different types of organizations. Networks are hard to create. They're costly. It's hard to create a new tie. I mean, just think about your friendship networks. How many friends can you really take care of and nurture in your social network at any one time? Ties are costly to create and to maintain. So in terms of these governance networks, these organizational networks that we study here, organizations want to create ties strategically that bridge fragmentations that we often see in networks. And one of those key fragmentations is between governmental and non-governmental sectors. So being well connected tends to increase the adoption of innovations, but being connected across sectors tends to increase these innovations a lot more. And we see that in some of these scatter plots that are in one of the papers that was recently published in Water Policy. And the implication of this is that collaborative processes should actively seek to engage, not just create ties, but engage organizations across a diverse set of functional domains, sectors of government, levels of government, and different ways in which we can conceptualize diversity, creation of diverse networks. Okay, so to conclude, so what parts did we go through? So I took some time to explain some of the theoretical foundations and talked about how our research was really all about this puzzle of what explains the adoption of water sustainability innovations. Our empirical strategy followed a survey approach in 5 UN regions. There were challenges to gathering the data. These kinds of data are not easy to collect, and they do present some limitations also for hypothesis testing. But survey methods is just a fundamental need if we're going to measure these types of data, which are not measurable through secondary sources. I reviewed some of our major findings, which had to do with the role of networks on innovations, the structure of innovations, as well as the evolution of networks. And I talked about 4 applied lessons learned to the practice of sustainability. So overall, the results of this study emphasize the importance of connections, networks matter, and the future of UN really should focus on the creation of networks that are integrative at the local level in particular, that enhance connections between local organizations regionally, and enhance connections with regional national groups, and particularly water sector organizations. I didn't talk much about the water sector organizations, but it does seem that from our research, the connections with those professional societies and water sector organizations really tend to drive innovation quite a lot over and above other network connections. So networks matter, and we need to create diversity within networks. Okay, so that's what I prepared for you, and I'm happy to take any questions, if any remain. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Aditi, you got your hand up, and I think Alan had a question in the chat queue as well.
Yeah, I checked a few. Oh, yeah, I saw Alan's question here. Do you have an external or objective metric for innovative or successful? Well, not really, because it's really very well. Okay, yes. So we used in the paper that I cited most in this presentation, we used the objective metric numbers of sustainability practices reported by an organization. So the answer to the question is yes, in the sense that we can use a metric that is, kind of this something that we use as an objective metric systematically applied across organizations, but I can't make the argument that it is absolutely the best possible metric. So there are other possible metrics that could be used. And in other research studies, we used, for instance, the perceived innovativeness of organizations as reported on survey. And so what we've tried to do is just perform the same kind of analysis, test the same kinds of hypotheses, using different metrics of innovativeness or success, and look for robust results across those inherently imperfect metrics. Thanks for the question. And I think we had one more.
Yeah, Dee Dee, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I just caught kind of the end of your presentation. It was interesting to hear about. You were mentioning, yeah, just about the network connections, and I was wondering what that looked like, kind of formal or informal ties. And then at the end, you just mentioned the water professional organization. So that helps me envision a little bit more with, like, ASCE has some subcommittees which are connecting people across different sectors in water, but aren't really always focused on a particular region or city. And yeah, so, and I would be interested in reading if that water professional society work is part of a paper, seeing more about that.
Yeah, it is. So this paper that I put on the slide, you see the site there, you can grab that online. So it's in press. It's available. I think that there's still water policy has this thing where they publish the uncorrected proofs. So it's almost there, but that's where you can find the thing on the water sector organizations. So something about the water sector organizations that's very, very important theoretically. I'm just going to maybe show you this graphic. So these networks that you see are geographically constrained. So the nodes are local governments in the state of Arizona, and they're positioned, where they're actually positioned in the state. And you see regional clumping, right? So, and that makes sense. So in terms of shared infrastructure here on the bottom right, and joint program implementation on the upper right, you see geographic proximity, or being in the same county, has a lot to do, it seems, with having a tie. But then when you look at this information network, you see many long distance ties that go from the far north of the state to the far south of the state. And these kinds of long distance ties are important mechanisms for sharing information and resources that otherwise wouldn't be shared. So oftentimes these cities are just looking around themselves, asking, well, what have other places done? What have other places tried that have been successful, that have been a failure, and how can we learn from that? And the water sector organizations are organizations that are somehow independent of geography, that can help to create those very long distance ties, which tend to be very important for information gathering and rational learning, if you will. So that's the explanation of why it matters. And we write about that in the paper.
Adam, are you saying that those things, like those dots up in the north border, are not actually up there, but are those the national organizations, or you don't really have the national organizations on here? Well,
not in this particular graphic. So this particular graphic is only local governments, but in the entire data set, in this larger network graphic you see in the middle, that's all of them. It includes local governments, organizations within local governments which are geographically constrained, as well as national and regional organizations which aren't attached to a particular geography. Yeah. So from this large network graphic, we can extract different types of networks. If we only want to look at local governments, we can do that with these data.
Do you have tribal governments in your data set?
Yes, we do have tribal governments. I don't know. I can't tell you much more than that without digging into the data set, but we definitely do. Yeah.
That's great. Any other questions for Dr. Henry? Okay, well, thanks as always for your time. I will get this posted so it lives on forever. Thanks, Paula, for joining us. She's from the GI Exchange. She's one of our stakeholders, so I'm glad you were able to pop on today, Paula, and it's good to see everyone. You guys stay safe out there, especially my Colorado colleagues. It's Snowmageddon still happening, so hope to see you all next week. Take care and stay safe.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.